right. Robb Wolf, welcome back to the Future of Fitness.
Eric, good to see you, man. You look more and more handsome every time I see you, or my eyesight continues to degrade. One or the other. I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's probably the latter, but I'll
A little
take
bit of
it.
both.
And now
Yeah,
you just got yourself a monthly segment on this podcast because I love to hear it. My ego is fragile. So thank you, Rob.
absolutely. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah, man. And back to you too. Not to fluff you up too much, but I know you just hit a benchmark, I think of 50 or something like that. And you look
52.
great.
I'm way
52,
over
dude.
the, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And you
way
look
over.
really good. I mean, it's
Thank you.
funny. I can't remember. I was looking at something on Instagram, just wasting time. And it had this thing of like, this is what 30 years ago we thought 45 looked like. Right. And it was like, they looked old, tired, right?
Right,
Like what a 65, 70 year old looks like. But now we look at 45 as like, vibrant, like still doing a lot of stuff, like
right.
you. Right. So it's just interesting. I mean, okay, let's start with that because it's just an interesting conversation on aging and longevity. But when you look at today's people in our age bracket, 45 to 55, are we healthier in that age bracket than we were 30 years ago?
I I think by and large, yes, smoking is almost unheard of in
True.
our peer group, and from both a health and like an aesthetics kind of perspective, man, if you want to age your skin, just like bathe it in free radicals from cigarette smoke or other types of smoke, to be honest. And so I think that that's a big deal. I will say that it's almost, I remember as a kid, I read this fantasy series by Robert Pirsig. It was Myth Incorporated. It was like
Hmm.
this kid who got taken in as uh, a sorcerer's apprentice, and it was pretty funny. It was pretty funny stuff. But they arrived at this place where there were like it was one species, but for 1,000 years, 2,000 years, one of them had basically been on this track of being like these warrior Spartan badasses, and then the other one was like these couch potatoes, overfed, sedentary. And so the story goes that they got roped into this thing where they were going to have a battle with what they thought was basically the couch potatoes, but it turned out there was this whole other section of these like Spartan warriors, and they're like 6'5" and 300 pounds and jacked and everything, and it ended up being quite a thing. And I think about that in terms of today, and that I almost feel like there's like a speciation event, like when you have
Oh,
people, and some of this is the good fortune of being able to do this, but you can work out, you can control your food, you can sleep. Like I think sleep is one of these things. Like 2001, I read Lights Out, Sleep, Sugar, and Survival, and it was written by evolutionary biologist and a biophysicist, and so it really spoke to me about kind of the evolutionary biology and the thermodynamics, the physics of why sleep is so important. And so, I'm 25 years in, half of my life effectively, that I've been really prioritizing sleep. And I don't know if anybody in the past has really done that other than before TV, before social media, before the ubiquity of the electric light bulb. I think that people just slept more, so there was kind of some things stacked there. But we are so lucky to have the amount of information that we do, and hopefully you can curate it and get it into a few like Huberman Lab actionable
yeah.
steps. Get the light in your eyes. Although, like, if you do the full Huberman protocol, I don't know if you have time to take a dump throughout the day and you do anything other than like his protocol, all the time. But
Yeah.
you know, if you eat reasonably well and you don't smoke, you don't abuse alcohol, you prioritize sleep, you do some amount of exercise, it's amazing. And then when you look again at so I missed my 30th high school reunion because of COVID. I graduated in 1990, so it was 2020 that should have happened. But I saw some pictures of my classmates, and it's like,
Mm.
damn, like you really, at 10 years, you could see where the different lifestyle choices were kind of diverging. And then at 20 years, but at 30 years, it was again what I would call like a speciation event. It's kind of crazy. And I don't know that I'm going to live particularly longer than probably most of these people, but I feel like I will get twice as much life out of it. because I still do jujitsu at a fairly high level, and I lift
Mhm.
weights, and I most days I feel pretty good. It's not like being a teenager, but more days than not, I get up and I'm like, I've got a little piss and vinegar in my soul to go do some stuff, and and I'm lucky in that regard too, that I have work that I find meaningful, and my family doesn't hate me yet and stuff like that. So you add that other good stuff in there, and it's good. And I think back to my dad. When my dad was 50, he seemed old. He seemed
Yeah.
frail. And I guess compared to myself at 30, I am kind of old and frail, but I guess again compared to my peer group, like I'm doing pretty good. At 30, I could power clean and push jerk 350 pounds like that. Boom. And there's no fucking way I could do that now. So, few injuries, some mileage and all that, but I'm way better at jujitsu than I was when I was 30. So there's that.
Yeah, it's for me too, I'm in way better shape. You compare me to 25 to what I am now, significantly better shape, but I don't really have the drive to lift as heavy as I did 10 years ago. Like I just don't desire to do that. I'd rather, kind of do the stuff I love, rather ski
Hmm.
more, rather just get out in the backcountry more in the summer and spring. And, all that stuff is more important to me. So I feel like my values are more in line with my fitness and wellness routines. So it's more motivating. Like I could give a shit how much I power clean now.
Right.
And that's an
Right.
impressive number, right? What you're talking about, 300, that's incredible. But yeah, and so there's a lot of topics I want to cover with you today, Rob. And obviously people can start to gather. You know your shit, right? When it comes to you've been paramount, I think, in my coaching and fitness and wellness industry journey, just from afar. We've had conversations over the years, but following your work and leaning into it a little bit has been really beneficial to me because I think you're not one to just go with the flow, right? If you see something wrong that you don't like, you're going to be vocal about it. And I think that's a really important role within our industry. So I want to start off with GLP-1,
Hmm.
and then we're going to get into Element, how you're doing with that company and some of the long-term visions of sustainability with that. I think is really cool. And then I also want to get your take on being on the Joe Rogan experience, which very
Sure.
few of my guests have done that. And then also talk about a little bit maybe the state of the industry or overall when it comes to working capital and things like that, or investor capital. So there's a lot to cover here. So let's start with GLP-1. I've had experts on this. Not okay. I've had business minds on this podcast who are presenting cases for how GLP-1 can be used in a fitness and wellness setting, right? Commercially. But we haven't really got into like, okay, well, what about the efficacy, long-term effects? So I know you have a different point of view on it. So maybe share what your thoughts are on GLP-1 and we'll take it from there.
It's funny. I've made a lot of people angry. Like I do very little social media at this point. I really need like a gun at my head to go on Instagram. I do a little bit of stuff on X or Twitter or whatever because I feel like the engagement is just better. And like if somebody wants to have a discussion, I can like put in some citations and we can have a conversation and all that stuff. But I've posted some stuff around GLP-1 and drugs in this class and potential future drugs, and it has bent people because I've made the case that I think these things may end up being a net good for society, and that's with the acknowledgement that there is absolutely a downside. Like some people end up with a gastroparesis where their stomach doesn't work anymore. Like
Mm,
that's a pretty big deal.
mm,
Like
yeah.
what's that saying? You got to break some eggs to make an omelet. Like that's kind of a gnarly omelet to make. But hardly anybody in our space really understands the gravitas of where we are with the obesity story. Like in 2004, I think was the first time that I gave any public discussion around the reality that the Congressional Budget Office then had a projection that the US would effectively be bankrupt from diabetes related healthcare costs by 2035. And that
Yeah.
was before COVID. That was before a whole host of other things. Like what they projected is that we would spend every nickel, dime, and penny that we had on dealing with the externalities of diabetes related problems. not a single bullet fired in the military, not a single pothole filled on our infrastructure. Everything would be devoted to just dealing with diabetes related issues. And I don't think that much has changed on that. Now we just keep printing money, and that's a whole other discussion about when the chickens will come home to roost on that. But I will still say that, every single year, it's like every 3 years, every 4 years that the FDA has like its updated food guidelines, and it's just ridiculous. Like the industry collusion there is so obvious, and it's just gaslighting doesn't even describe it. They will continually say that low carb diets and paleo diets and different things like that are not appropriate, but like a slim fast based dietary approach is fine. There was even like a report, a study that scientists showed that a diet of hyper processed foods can in fact be healthy. Like I don't know if you remember seeing that thing, but it was just like the bullshittiest of bullshit. So we're not getting any real like diet and lifestyle intervention at the top end of this stuff, like Walter Willett, Harvard School of Medicine. Like there's still just you're either vegan or eggs are going to kill you because they're worse than cigarettes and stuff. So there's just this chasm with regards to like public health messaging. And then post COVID, we're motoring in this direction where like everything that's not 100% formulaic, accepted by mainstream medicine is misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, which either of those have kind of a different delineation to it, and it's poised to be censored. So like even trying to get good information out is becoming difficult. So then we have these GLP-1s that really fucking work. Like they work. Like people will lose weight on them. There are absolutely side effects. Some of the side effects are pretty gnarly, but I have a good friend of mine who owns one of the most popular restaurants in Atlanta, Georgia. It's called the Nook. And he was at a meeting of like these top level restaurateurs, and these folks were talking about the Ozempic effect on restaurants, which is that they've seen this dramatic decrease in both frequency of people being at restaurants and also like the total ticket price or ticket amount. It's not necessarily the price because costs have gone up. People are not ordering as much food as they used to.
Wow.
And all kinds of, this is one of the funny things that when I've mentioned this shit online, people who know not a goddamn thing about any of this stuff, well, people are, don't have money because of COVID and stuff like that. There is truth to that, but like there's a deeper trend here. Like people have been trending towards larger and more food purchases for a long time. Like this has just been this thing that restaurateurs like just bank on. It's almost like an interest rate. It's like we can expect like a 1 or 2% per year increase in the amount of food that people order, just because that's the way it goes. And that's changed. Nabisco, the manufacturer of Triscuit and wheat thins and all the stuff, they're trying to figure out a way of suing the GLP-1 manufacturers because it's gutting their business.
That's
and
absurd.
again, like I've thrown this stuff out to the unwashed masses, and I'm going to sound like a huge dick. I don't know if I'm like cranky today or what, but like just my tolerance of shenanigans is like either get educated on a topic or like shut the fuck up about it. But I guess this is kind of what we're trying to do here. But I just find something fascinating that these snack food manufacturers who have been like robber barons the last 30 years,
Yep.
They've got government subsidized raw materials coming in the front end. They've got the kind of academic industrial complex on the other side signing off on their stuff so long as it doesn't have animal products in it. It can be seed oils and refined sugars and all this stuff. It's all good. So they're winning until these GLP-1s come in and really have punched them in the nuts, have really undercut their sales. And I find that fascinating. And the costs associated with massive, like I did this thing. I've never published it, but I might do it. Like there's some rough estimates of like how profitable the drug cartels are, and they're like ridiculously profitable. There's so much profit margin there. The cartels are starting to have problems dealing with the healthcare costs of their people, because in these developing countries, particularly Mexico, that it is industrialized to a degree that you actually have a legitimate middle class and upper middle class, and they're eating differently and they're getting sick. And the thing about diabetes related healthcare costs is it goes up at an exponential. And there is nothing else that you can do economically to offset exponential growth. You can be as profit, whether you are Pfizer or whether you're like the Sinaloa cartel. You can't deal with an exponential indefinitely. It will eat you alive. And this is just one of these things that I don't think folks like remotely wrap their heads around. But then along come these GLP-1 agonists, and they really seem to be having some effect. And so I know that was like this long, convoluted story, and I don't know that
I
it
love
really
it.
tells any insight other than this might actually be an important like footnote in the history of this whole thing, and that it could potentially turn the tide of these monumental healthcare costs. Even though these GLP-1s are really expensive, they're not remotely as expensive as dealing with the costs of dialysis and the other kind of extenuating circumstances around metabolic disease. And so I'm bullish that over the long haul, this is going to end up being a net positive for society. And this is somebody who, it really pains me to say that. I'd love to see people change diet and lifestyle and all that. And I see a lot of people get very like moralistic about this, where it's like, well, they're just taking a drug. Well, yeah, and hopefully they don't die from diabetic complications and cost society a huge chunk of money in the process with that. So I don't know, man. I mean that's my take. That's like my alternate take on the GLP-1s, that I think it might end up being a net benefit when it's all said and done, with the understanding that there are costs associated with it, that some people end up with some really significant secondary problems, that there is some significant weight gain associated with going off of them. Maybe you just don't go off of them. I don't know. But as long as we will continue to subsidize the industrialization of our food system, and as long as that's all supported at the academic level, and we're just lying to people, but then hoping that they choose something different that will help them to be healthy. Like we need something else that can cut through all that.
Yeah. I think I basically agree with everything you said. So uh, I hate that we're getting into bed with pharma on it again, right? But I don't know how that's ever deroots itself from
Hmm.
our communities. I think the knee jerk reaction within the fitness and health community was like, it's cheating the system, right? It's unnatural. It's like you got to do it the hard way, the old fashioned way. There's no shortcuts. Like I've heard these things being said dozens and dozens of times, and my thought is like, well, when I look around, like for most people, we do not live in a natural world at all, right? From the way we live indoors, we live essentially in aquariums most of the time, right? Like
Right.
the food we eat, the sedentary life, like this isn't natural what we've done. So maybe we need an unnatural way to counterbalance it. And that's just my, theoretical without, knowing the research really well. So I agree. I think it could be a huge opportunity. We just have to, tread carefully. But the other option is do nothing and stay on the current path. And that's fucked, right? We already know that. It's only
Oh,
going to get
it'll
more.
fix itself, because when everything collapses, people won't be fat anymore because it's going to be like the road warrior.
Right.
We ran a gym for better than 10 years. It
Mhm.
was the fourth CrossFit gym in history. We were picked as one of Men's Health top 30 gyms in America. We were really good at what we did.
Yeah.
And I can count on one hand the number of people that were morbidly obese that I got them down to a healthy weight. Because when they're that far down the track, it's devilishly hard to get them to do anything to change. I have like one guy, 5'9", walked into our gym, 425 pounds. He's a lawyer. Like, God has never made someone better at arguing and more, appropriate for arguing. And he argued and fought the whole goddamn way, but we eventually got him down to a really fit, good looking 190 pounds. Like, he's a big dude, but we
Hmm.
kept a bunch of muscle on him in this process of, you know, cutting his body weight in half. But my God, the work that we had to do to get him there, and then the number of other people that we get him fitter, and oftentimes the conversation was, so if you don't want to comply with the diet to any degree, that's cool. We'll work you out. We'll get you fitter. You'll be healthier. You just can't complain about your weight. Like, if you're going to complain about your weight or how you look, then you gotta follow the dietary stuff. And if you're not going to follow that, I'm not going to fire you unless, like, you continue to bitch about still being fat when you refuse. I can't out exercise. I only have you for an hour 3 to 5 times a week, which is a lot. Like, that's a lot. But you have the other 23 hours of all the other days to undo what I tried to fix. And I just can't beat that. And usually with that conversation, the person was like, okay, that's cool. And sometimes it would guilt them into a little bit better dietary compliance, but we're really good at what we did, understanding the neuroregulation of appetite, being I actually cared about these people, like, I wanted to see them succeed. And it was hard as fuck to get them to change, and the recidivism and all that type of stuff. So the high-minded, like, oh, it's not natural and you need to do it the hard way. Like, I don't even know who these people are. I guarantee you they don't have successful businesses working with people. Like, they train like 3 people a month, and that's it. Like, the people that I've seen this refrain, they're usually like a tiny following. They haven't written or contributed anything to anything, and yeah, and because they don't actually get in and look somebody in the eye and need to, like, serve them to be able to keep the lights on and the bills paid. And when you do that, there's a degree of, I sound like a huge dick most of the time, but actually there's a lot of empathy involved with doing this stuff. Like, I got to sit down and meet this person somewhere where it's mutually beneficial. I can't just bowl them over and force them to do it. And I'm not just going to fold under and compromise all my values on it. And so, if there's this thing, if the person is struggling horrifically, and I know they are because the deck is stacked against them. I said this in my second book, Wired to Eat. If you
Hmm.
are, when we understand the evolutionary biology of the neuroregulation of appetite, if you live in the modern world and you are not fat, sick, diabetic, and broken, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. Like, it's magic that you manage to, like, wiggle your way through the system and not be in that situation, because everything about the current world is stacked in favor of obesity and weight gain and sickness. Like, everything is. So if we have one get out of jail free card, or one, magic rabbit out of a hat, like, thank God for that, and we'll kind of see where that takes us.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll see because it's not going anywhere.
It's not going
Let's shift.
anywhere. Yeah.
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 Uh, let's shift slightly, Rob. Like Element, founder of that company, right? The, I mean, it seems like this brand and product has hit the market by storm. I mean, when did you found it? Like 3, 4 years ago? It's everywhere.
We started it officially the very end of 2018. So it was like
Okay.
soft launched December of 2018. Myself and then the Keto Gains guys, we kind of put that out to our communities and, like, hey, we have this electrolyte product. If you're interested, you can kind of pre-order it. And so 2019 was the first kind of official year, which is a great year to, launch
Mhm.
something. Right at the end of it, we were like, oh my God, the world's gonna end. But yeah, and it's a pretty interesting story that it came from me discovering or recognizing that because I have to eat a low carb ketogenic type diet to deal with autoimmune and gut issues, like I like eating this way, but I would love to be able to like throw down some white rice and different things. But I get glycemic issues, I get autoimmune issues, and I have these gut issues that flare up with all this stuff. So I have to eat this way, or else I'm gonna die, or I'm gonna have a really, sick, unhealthy kind of existence. And so it was Luis Villasenor, one of the co-founders of Ketogains, that helped me figure this out. And when we first arrived at all this stuff, I was like, oh my God, like if these are my issues, and I looked at the crowd that I'm usually serving, man, like 95% of the problems that the folks that I try to serve, most of their issues are probably electrolyte related, specifically sodium. And so
Interesting.
we put together a free downloadable guide called How to Make Your Own Keto Aid. We just called it Keto Aid. And it basically told you how much table salt, potassium chloride, lemon juice, water, stevia, and go. And we didn't have, this wasn't a lead magnet. There wasn't an email that we got, to get this thing. It was just up. But within 6 months, we had 500,000 downloads of it. And
Oh my God.
people were like raving about the Keto Aid. And they were tagging us on social media. They're like, thank you so much. I feel so much better. It's addressing all these problems. But the one issue that I have is that when I go through TSA with 3 bags of white powder, like the TSA doesn't really like that all that much. So if you guys ever thought about like a stick pack or a scooper or something, I would buy it. And so we started getting just a ton of interest like that, like people saying, thank you for the Keto Aid, but if you ever do a more convenient play, then we would love to do that. And I would have never thought that there was this space in the electrolyte world for another player. But when you really look at still even people in this scene, they don't really understand electrolyte physiology. Like Prime, not knocking on those guys, but they rightly acknowledge that Americans and Westerners, by and large, consume too much sodium as part of the diet, get too little potassium with the diet, and so they have this like 800 milligram, potassium, 100 milligram sodium type deal. And I get the logic there. The problem is it doesn't work in real life. Like you're going to kill people with that. They've seen some problems with that stuff. When you sweat, when you're dealing with altitude issues, when you exercise, you lose 99.9% sodium, very, very little magnesium and potassium. And so you end up in this sodium deficient state really quickly. If you're on any type of a low carb diet, and generally any type of diet cleanup, when you clean up your diet, you eat less processed foods, and processed foods are where Americans get 85% of their sodium. So whether
Right.
it's paleo or vegan or what have you, if you eat a clean diet, you usually see your sodium absolutely plummet. And what do people do who eat cleaner diets? They tend to exercise, they tend to do other stuff, and then their sodium needs increase. And so it was literally hidden in plain sight, this massive need for a sodium forward electrolyte product. Gatorade, when it was originally released, was a gram of sodium. And over time, it has gone down to the low levels that it is on sodium and the high levels that it has on sugar. So we've talked to a number of people in this scene, like manufacturers and people in the uh, flavoring part of this world, and they really feel like Element was like a category creator. Like there wasn't really this category before, this kind of like sodium forward category. And there's lots and lots of players in there now, but it arrived at dealing with my issues first, and then recognizing that my issues were probably similar to a lot of the folks that we serve. And then when we tried to help the people in our communities, we did it via a freemium model first. Here's this free guide, go use this. And now, even though we have this premium thing, the stick packs and all that stuff, we still really lean into that free make it yourself guide. Because if you don't like stevia, or you want a different flavor, or like a million, gosh, I thought I had this turned off, sorry, all these other issues, then it's like, well, here, use our downloadable guide and just make sure you get the electrolytes correct. And then all the flavorings and everything, do it however you want to do it. We just want to make sure that you're doing this stuff right. And they tell you from a customer experience perspective, that's been genius, because it's like, I don't like stevia. Okay, well, we have our raw unflavored. It doesn't have stevia, it doesn't have any of that other stuff. Well, I don't like this. Okay, well, then use our free downloadable guide. Just make sure that you get this much sodium, this much potassium, this much magnesium. And you can't believe how somebody who's just mad and they want to be mad at the world and they want to be mad at us. And we have an answer that doesn't involve like trying to get them to buy our product. It's like, if you want our product, get our product. It tastes really good. That's the only magic there. But we're not going to tell you that there's magic sodium in it. It's plain sodium chloride, it's plain potassium chloride, it's magnesium malate. There's nothing magical about any of that stuff. It's all commoditized. It's good quality, but it's commodity shit. There's nothing magical about it, and we're never going to say any different. We did do some really fantastic work on the flavoring, and that's why they taste super good. But if you want to make it at home and do your own stuff, then do it. But it's been kind of a cool thing, because our CX, our customer experience, process, people not infrequently will write in and they have some gripe, and it's like, well, okay, we can give you a free box, or we can do this, or you can do the raw and flavored, or you can do the mix it yourself. And it's like we're coated in Teflon. Like, people can get all angry at us and everything, but it's like, we're fully transparent with everything. And you're happy to be angry, but like, we're not going to give you anything to be angry about, because we're not going to tell you, ours is the best. I think it's good. I think it tastes good. But if somebody has a better tasting one, fuck, get that one. Like, I'll buy you the first box of the other one and you can compare it. I don't care. So, yeah.
It does taste really good. I drink it daily. But I really liked, and it took me a minute to figure out that it's supposed to be a hot drink, is the chocolate variations that I have.
Yeah.
Oh man. I love it. My sweet tooth, it gets me there. So it's been a really good product, man. I really enjoy it. And go ahead.
I honestly haven't been a huge fan of the chocolate. Like, I think it was a good idea, but I haven't been able to do regular dairy for ages, but then I figured out this thing with A2 dairy that I can handle that. And I put a number of the chocolate caramel, chocolate chai in a glass of A2 milk with a couple of ice cubes. And like chocolate milk. It's chocolate milk is basically what it is. And oh my God, it is so good. And I'll do that as a post-workout recovery thing, because it's got a little bit of protein, it's got a little carbs, it's got a little fat, and it tastes amazing. And I can just like shotgun it down. It just tastes phenomenally. But before that, I was really blasé about the chocolate flavors. I was stoked that people liked them, but I wasn't personally a fan. And then I figured out putting it in milk. Like, oh my God, this is awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, it gets the little kid in you, right? And you guys are working now. I mean, what is the focus for Element? I think there's more like commercial partnerships where you guys are focusing on, right? With like gyms and health clubs and things like that.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
So, I mean, we've been a really heavy direct to consumer business, building that relationship. But I want to say we have like nearly 5,000 wholesale partners now. So we haven't gone the traditional retail route, like trying to get into like a Target or a Safeway or something like that. We might do that at some point, but what we've really tried to do is lean into partnerships with healthcare providers, chiropractors, naturopaths, functional medicine doctors, gyms. So like the gym I'm a part of, Straight Blast Gym, it's a jiu-jitsu and MMA gym that's global. Lots of those folks carry it. And what's been fascinating, I would have never predicted this, but people actually walk in off the street to these gyms or chiropractic offices to buy Element. Like they will be on a subscription, but it's 8 days until their subscription is gonna fire off, and they're out, and they'll drop into these spots and then buy an extra box. And I would have never in a million years predicted that, but that has become maybe 25% of our total business. And last year we passed $206 million in sales. And so, I mean, it's going really well. Yeah. Yeah. Very, very fortunate, very lucky, a really amazing team of people, but that curated wholesale partnership has has been this really, really big deal for us. Yeah. Because, like my coach, Ricky Davison, somebody's doing jujitsu, they get a cramp, they feel exhausted afterwards. He's like, dude, you need some element. And he'll give them one of our sample packs, and then they use it like, oh, this is amazing. And then they start buying it. And so whether it's chiros or doctors or coaches, it's the drug deal model. It's like first one's free, and then you try it, and you generally feel much better with it. And we still we'll tell people about the like homebrew and all that type of stuff, but it's just enough of a pain in the ass to go make it yourself that even though the stick packs aren't cheap, you're kind of like, oh, I'll make a home brew. I'll make a big bottle of it and save it. And then when I go to the gym or I do this stuff where it's inconvenient, I'll use the stick pack, so they end up doing a mix of that stuff. Yeah.
It's a great product. And, I know you've been in this industry for a long time. So it's great to see, truly strike gold with something like this. I mean, luck is a residue of design, right? A lot of years, putting your name out there, putting yourself out there. So it's really good to see. And I think listening to a podcast you're on a couple months ago, one of the things that's really exciting about this is I think we both have a very strong interest in sustainability, right? And I know you're tying in the company vision to food sustainability in particular. You and I had talked about a company I was part of, Flathead Biosolutions.
Hmm.
It's, not doing great. It's still barely breathing, but it's out there,
Right.
with some really interesting technology about, regenerative agriculture, soil health, things like that. And, obviously, book Sacred Cow. I really urge people to go pick that up and read it because it's a big problem. We have the solutions we need. We're just not applying them at scale. So maybe tie in sustainability into the element vision and, educate us a little bit there.
Sure. It doesn't, it's not an obvious like link into that stuff, but because we are a nicely profitable business, we've been able to look at some things like acquiring land, putting that into trusts, which then can you can do these wildlife easements and whatnot, which
Hmm.
basically it sets that land up such that in theory it can never be developed. You're basically leaving it as like a natural habitat, or
Awesome.
like maybe 10% of it can be used for agricultural purposes, and then the 90% of it is uh, an easement. The interesting thing is when you take a patch of dirt and you put it into the wildlife easement kind of pathway, whatever the market value is of that land can then be a tax offset. So if it's a $200 million potential, development value that day, you get a $200 million potential tax, ease. And there's interesting things you need to do to make all that stuff work, but it's really interesting and there's a lot of value to it. And so that's one area that we've been looking into. And then we also at a personal level, this isn't at a company level, but our CEO James Murphy and I have really been looking into personally investing and hopefully working with people who are. I'm a huge fan of nuclear energy, and I'm
Hmm.
also very fascinated by the potential of developing sustained fusion energy. And so over the course of the rest of my life, I'm going to put a lot of my resources into that type of stuff. I think wind and solar have a very small place, and the bulk of that place currently is in distracting people. And I think it's going to kill people ultimately because it's not actually a great energy density story. I could give you the link to a fantastic podcast with this guy who is a geophysicist, but he mentions that for us to be able to make all the wind turbines alone that they're projecting that we need to get, we need to mine 6 times more copper than is known to exist on the planet. And then even if we just waved a magic wand and we had all the wind, all the solar that we in theory needed today, that energy density is so diffuse. It's so spread out. You can't make wind and solar components using wind and solar as the energy input. So it's a completely unsustaining, and I hope people call bullshit on this. I hope they call bullshit on us. And then they get in and investigate it. Because when you start investigating it, you look at the amount of resources that are being dumped into sustainable solutions, you get the sense, or I get the sense, and I think anybody else with an IQ above room temperature would get the sense that our governments are trying to kill us if this is the direction that they're investing this wind and solar thing. So I'm really going to lean heavily into investing and trying to develop conventional nuclear energy, small modular reactors, thorium, and things like that. And then on the microplastics and garbage and all these different things, it's really a bastard to deal with that stuff. Like,
Hmm.
do you dump it in the ocean? Do you landfill it? If you landfill it, there's these issues with that. Incineration is actually kind of an interesting option, but there's a lot of pollution associated with that. There's some greenhouse gas emissions that are concerning, but there's this thing called a plasma incinerator, which is very energy intensive. But if you have energy that's too cheap to meter, like if electricity is just give it away, like it's not even worth metering, which has been kind of the promise since the 1950s if we really leaned in heavily on some of these nuclear energy sides. But a plasma incinerator burns things at like 7,000 degrees. So it burns so hot that there's no like carbon monoxide left. There's no weird organic solvents left. What it ends up doing is it reduces everything to elements. The carbon is the carbon, the chloride is the chloride, the palladium is the palladium. And you can dump just about anything into this and it will reduce it down to its constituent elements or pretty close to it. It's really energy intensive. It costs
Mhm.
a lot of energy, but again, if energy is super cheap, then like the garbage and landfill and all of that side of microplastics being out in the environment largely gets addressed because you just nuke that stuff back to constituent parts. And if energy is that cheap, you really could then start sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere and via basic synthetic chemistry go from carbon dioxide and build it all the way up to plastics or lipids or whatever it is that you want. We can do that today. It's just really, really energy costly. And this is where like still plants are so favorable with textiles and lipids and food because the sun, although diffuse, we, 2/3 of the Earth's landmass are grasslands. And so those are great places to grow protein, carbs, and fat in the form of plants, and then use those like cotton or corn or soybeans or whatever for the different things that we're doing. But investing in it, so this isn't like an element company value. This is more of a founder's value, but we're definitely going to put energy and our energy and our money, which are basically one and the same. Money is basically a form of concentrated energy. We're going to put that really
Hmm.
strongly into these nuclear development projects. And I'm really interested in developing like this high temperature incineration process so that there's a viable way of dealing with garbage, dealing with all that stuff, so it doesn't get out in the environment. And then actually you've got raw materials that you can then plug back into, whatever manufacturing process you want to do.
Yeah, amazing, man. Yeah, I wish you the best of luck on that. I think you and I talked years ago about your interest in, kind of micro nuclear
Mm-hmm.
plants,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think it's extremely promising. Nuclear, from everything I've read so far, just seems to be bastardized for some unknown reason, right? By media or whoever powers are to be who control those narratives. So it's unfortunate, but it's very, very promising. And I know there's a lot of people looking into it now too. And
Reason
Rob, with like
Magazine
the
had a really
go ahead.
interesting piece on nuclear energy, and it was right as it should have been really taking off. 3 Mile Island happened, and
Hmm.
which was a nuclear disaster. There was a meltdown. It was all contained, but it scared the piss out of people, and rightfully so on the one hand. But then, kind of this environmental activism part got plugged into it, and interestingly, so people like Governor Cuomo of New York and stuff like
Hmm.
that came out at really, really vocal against nuclear energy. And it turns out that he and his family were heavily invested in the infrastructure that delivers natural gas. And when you don't lean into nuclear, then you do lean into natural gas and coal, which is what the Cuomos were both, what the Cuomo family was super heavily invested in. So, yeah.
The Cuomos. With the last few minutes, because I know probably going over a little bit here with you, Rob, but actually, okay, so this is a nice segue because I think the last time I really invested some time and energy into nuclear energy was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast. He had someone who really was a pro nuclear, gave the whole history, like you were talking about, really laid it out. Now you've been on Rogan, maybe just in a few minutes time, express what that experience is like. Like I've heard a couple of things like you don't call Rogan, Rogan calls you, right? Like, so how has that experience been? How influential is that podcast? And then, what happened afterwards? And were you nervous? Like give us all the human, experience of being on that show.
Yeah, definitely nervous. And in particular, like I don't have much going on today, but like I have essential tremor syndrome. And some days, particularly if I get really wound up and nervous, it's bad. And so that's kind of an anxiety point. But I had been on Rogan 2 earlier times, one way back, another one when Wired to Eat was launched. And I guess a thing, like Joe gave me his cell phone number. And every once in a while he would pop up and he's like, "Hey man, what do you think about this? What do you think about that?" And I would give him my thoughts. But occasionally I would ping him something. I'm like, "Hey, I think you might find this interesting." And then I get a thank you, but very, very respectful of the amount of like influx that he probably gets. I'm nothing to no one. And like my email inbox is like, "Hey Rob, we've got the newest whiz bang thing to help you and Element like scale." And I've got a couple of hundred emails a day on that. And then just people, I love going on podcasts. I really enjoy doing it. I feel like I've got some value to add, but there's only so much
You're
time
very
in the
good.
day. So I've got like some inbound around that stuff. And like, I don't, probably 10 years of my life isn't a day of the social exposure that Joe has. When you think about like a podcast reaching billions of people, like it's just, my
Crazy.
first podcast over its whole run ended up accruing 34 million downloads over the whole run over like 7 years, which was really good for the time because
That's a huge success.
podcasts
Yeah.
weren't that big at the time. But now like singular episodes of podcasts get 100 million downloads, fucking crazy. But so like for the third time that we were on there, I did ping Joe. I'm like, "Hey, no obligation, but like we've got this movie and book, Sacred Cow. It's all about sustainability. If you'd like to have us on, would love to do it." He was going to have us on, and then COVID happened. And then not just COVID happened, but the snowpocalypse in Texas happened,
Yeah.
where like everything shut down, and like Diana Rogers was trapped in a hotel in like downtown Austin, and it was starting to look like the zombie apocalypse down there and everything. And so he was like, "I'm really sorry, we're gonna have to punt." And so I actually ended up moving to Kalispell. And then it was a good 6 months later, and I pinged him like, "Hey, whenever you have some time, if you still want to do this, would love to do it." And he immediately got back and he's like, "Yeah, let's knock this out. Let's do it." And so we went there, and Joe's just gregarious, friendly. He sniffs out bullshit like crazy. Like just if you're trying to make something up, it's almost like a cop or something where they're like, something's not adding
Yeah.
up here. So like you want to remain pretty factual. And if you're going to speculate, you're like, "Hey, I'm guessing it." Like if you do some caveats, it's like, "Here's the facts as I understand them. I'm really going to speculate here." And then he'll give you some latitude on that. If I had one critique of Joe, and actually I think that has gotten less over time, but earlier on, you'd feel like you were making some big point, and then he would go off on some tangent, and I would feel like you kind of lose him, and I would see that in other guests. But I feel like that has actually mitigated over time. He really tends to stay with the course, and if he has a question, he's like, "Hey, I want to shift gears," or whatever. But there was a period of time where if I had a criticism, it was the you would just say one offhand thing, but you're trying to go it north, and the offhand thing kind of alluded to east, and then he would just fucking send the whole thing east, and it would kind of occasionally drive it off of a cliff. I don't know what else. Like, I think for me, like, I've been super super respectful of his space and his time. If he reaches out to me, I'm more than happy to try to help him. Every once in a while, I will encounter something that I think is interesting, but I'm also like, I'm pretty aware that there's like a billion people who are probably seeing similar shit. So it has to be like really, really unique for me to bother reaching out to him, because I figure that somebody else has eyeballs on it. And I just don't want to be the 20th person that sends him this thing that I think is interesting. And I think that because I've been super respectful of that, like people like him and Tim Ferris and other folks that I have a pretty good relationship with, like when I really need some help from them, they're usually willing to do it. But man, I'll save it 10 years. I'm not trying to shake them down constantly. And for people in the industry that are trying to elevate themselves, it just fucking takes time. I'm 25 years into doing this. I've been chipping away at this stuff for 25 years. I'm now
Wow.
52 years old. Half of my life I've been working to build some degree of bandwidth and credibility and whatnot. And there are lots of people that come in and build a platform much quicker than I do. And usually what I notice around that is they pick a really polarizing personality approach. And this is some of the counseling to get, and even the social media algorithms reward polarization. And so I get that. But like, if you being of service, being valuable, being trustworthy, putting the other person ahead of your own needs, like that will serve you really, really well. And you'll have somebody that in that either really key moment or like a dark moment where you need some help, like your kid gets cancer and you hope that maybe Rogan or Ferris or somebody could hook you up with like the best person in Germany or France or something like that, that you're like, hey, I hate to bother you, but this thing happened and can you help me? Then they're like, yeah, this guy's always been really good and he's never asked for a goddamn thing. And so here you go. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Yeah, it's always curious. I think, I always say like one of my life goals is to get on Rogan because I know I would have done something worthy, right? It's not necessarily
Right.
the experience of being on the show, but it's like, okay, I've done something that's worth a 20 million, 100 million person audience, right? I don't know what that is yet, to be quite honest with you. Maybe it's micro nuclear. I don't know.
Right.
But we'll see, man. Well, Rob, I could, there's a bunch of other topics I want to get to, but time is time. If people want to learn more about what you're doing, reach out to you personally. I mean, I know there's robbwolf.com. Is there any other place that you'd like people to go, or is that the summation
That's
of
probably
things?
the best place. Like the only social media I'm doing at all is on X, and it's at Robb Wolf. I don't do a ton there, but that's kind of the only thing I'm doing. I am tinkering with the Substack, and so I've got a little bit of stuff. If you just search Robb Wolf with two B's over at Substack, you'll find that I haven't generated a ton, but I've got a lot of. I probably have 20 different articles that I've started and are on in various degrees of completion, and so I'm hoping to just kind of get some of that going over time. Some health, but a lot of economics, politics, politics light, politics being the interface between health, climate change, energy, because I feel like all those things are really woven together, and I feel like I've got the chops to comment on that type of stuff. So yeah, that's kind of the place and what I've had cooking of late.
Awesome. And for people who want to learn more too, that you have a really good podcast, A Healthy Rebellion with your wife, Nikki.
Yep.
Very good. You guys are consistent and you put out really good information. Like I said, you're kind of, well, not kind of, you are one of the very few people I can think of immediately when I want to get some truth when it comes to the world of nutrition and health, because there's so much bullshit. So thank you again for being
Thanks,
that
man.
person. Really appreciate it. And yeah, ladies and gentlemen, Robb Wolf.
Thank you.